Welcome to the stage, our panel, if you guys would like to join me. I'm going to sit right here.
This is you?
This is me.
All right.
So we have Zane Adams, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but Heather Corkery from CVS. What's your name? Miencier from Paramount Coffee, and of course Beto Galvan from ALBERTSONS companies, right? I
Yes.
got to get that in. Why don't we go around and kind of, Beto, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Beto, from Mexico. Started my professional career in a CPG, where I was there for around 23 years. Half of them in Mexico, half of them in the US. 2 years ago, I joined the ALBERTSONS companies as part of their own brands team. I'm responsible for the center of store categories, and it's been a blast.
And so you report to Chad Coster, SVP?
I report to Chad Coster.
Perfect.
Our lead.
Always love to know the relationships there.
Yes.
Kara.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Miencier with Paramount Roasters. We are a coffee roaster, branded and private brand, based out of Lansing, Michigan. I've been with the company for 8 years now. Yesterday was actually my work anniversary, so started at Paramount as an intern, so it's been fun. My whole career has been at Paramount and within private brands, so it's been a blast.
Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Corkery. I'm the Executive Director of Brand and Marketing for our store brand portfolio at CVS Health. And I've pretty much had all the jobs at CVS, from merchandising to marketing. I've spent pretty much my entire career at CVS. It's been a really rewarding career. And this job in private brands is really the culmination of everything from merchandising to marketing, and it wraps it all together into a great opportunity. So happy to be here.
And Zane.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for participating. And I think one of the coolest gatherings of private label. I get to serve as the co-CEO with FEDUP Foods. We are a functional fermented beverage producer based right here in the great state of North Carolina, 2 hours away in Asheville. We started the business a little over 14 years ago, going on our 15th year. Myself and co-CEO, we launched a tiny brand called Bucci, which is what we still use as our innovation arm, but we have the great pleasure of working in private label, really for the purpose of creating access so that people can not have to pay a whole lot of money for really, really important and delicious foods.
So I always like to do a panel, and I like to do a combination of people. And when we talk about diversity, this is my example of diversity, okay? It's age, it's position, it's manufacturers and retailers. It creates just a better conversation. And Beto and I talked about it, it's really for us to be able to talk about innovation and collaboration. And the unfortunate part of the innovation and collaboration conversation is very often it gets shut down. And whether it be retailers saying they don't innovate at all, or manufacturers saying we do innovate but they don't listen to us, and there's just this butting of heads. So I said, let's take a second and let's talk about it, because we have to collaborate to move forward. I don't think anybody would even argue about that, but what do we need to do to make that happen? So first of all, let's talk about how each of you would define innovation. What does it mean to you? Why don't we start with Heather?
Well, I think you guys saw our definition, our ultimate definition of innovation was the presentation you saw about Michael Graves, because that's, I believe, the truest definition of taking an unmet need and creating something new and different for our customers. And I think it's a scale. Innovation comes on a scale, right? Because we even think of innovation in form, and taking something like hydrogen peroxide that everyone's used to dumping down the sink, and looking at the beauty industry and looking at wipes and pumps, and just creating a new form. I also consider that little I innovation as kind of how we talk about it in our four walls.
Well, you have incremental and you have these big audacious things. Beto, what do you think? Innovation.
I'm like completely with the definition, and just building on that comment is innovation is not only about products, and that's probably something that we always focus most on. Innovation, it could be in the packaging, it could be in the presentation, it could be in the service. So definitely about satisfying those unmet needs is critical. And just building on that, and especially as we constantly get pushback against innovation, we always need to start on the consumer and the shopper. We need to understand what are we really trying to solve for. It's very easy to go with the momentum of just innovating just for the sake of innovating, and making the mistake of doing that. In my teams, when I joined the team, I challenged a lot of, when they were going to bring some innovation to any of the categories that we were managing, is I wanted to understand why and what we're trying to accomplish. And then what were the consumer problems to solve we were trying to address. Because one of common mistakes is just doing innovation for momentum. And the way that I see that is, imagine that you have multiple categories or multiple patients, and every patient has a different opportunity. And then you come, and for every patient you give them aspirins, you give them innovation. Why? Because that's the thing that you know how to do or that you can manage. And that's really why sometimes marketing teams or business teams lose credibility in front of commercial teams. I'm saying, you're bringing innovation for everything. Instead of when you have very clear understanding of why you're innovating, what are the problems you're trying to solve for, then you gain credibility with that group. And that way it's easier to sell in those platforms or those products of innovation where it makes sense, versus just pushing them in their throats and knowing that probably more than half of them will fail.
I did some consulting with a major retailer, and the CEO would look at his team, and they were asking for millions to launch some things, and he'd go, "Who cares?" Said, if somebody doesn't care, why are we spending money?
Agree.
So you're obviously in a very narrow category, right? It's coffee.
Yeah.
So talk to me about innovation. What does it mean for a company like Paramount?
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback off Beto's point, that it's not necessarily just the product. As you mentioned, coffee is most often just a one ingredient product. So it's tough. I mean, you can only do so much to roasted ground coffee, and it kind of is what it is. So really, we try to dive in with exploring new flavors across different categories, really diving into the sustainability piece. I know something we're really looking at now is compostable packaging in K-Cup format and bagged format. So really where we're putting our focus on, I think to your point, Christopher, the other day you had mentioned that with your daughters and the kind of the idea of sustainability, and they're not going to buy a product if it doesn't meet that. I think the challenge is a lot of the things that we deem to be innovative these days are kind of expectations. So things like single origin coffee or fair trade coffee, like people in Gen Z, millennials, other groups as well, like that's an expectation, it's not necessarily an innovation. So trying to find something that's actually new, unique, and different, and go from there.
And just one comment from that is
Sure.
that it's not only expectation, it's expectation and they're not willing to pay more for it. So that's where it gets very tricky.
Not
Well, I mean, and that's the category. Coffee is the perfect category for that, because private label has done so well at creating a great product and delivering fair trade and organic that we've trained the shopper. We really have. I know my wife walks in every 2 weeks with a couple of bags of coffee from Aldi that was $6 single origin fair trade.
Yeah.
And it's great coffee.
I mean, and there's in terms of like when we think about innovation, I know with us, we like to think about innovation as a process, right? So it's not a destination, it's not an ideal, it really is a process, and how you begin to approach that. For us as manufacturers, and I know you can relate it, we touch it in different ways, and one of those is supply line, and then one of those is being able to sit with a buyer at a store and be able to pull back the layers of what's there that ends up making a program more sustainable, that can drive some of the best change that we can have on this planet in terms of climate crisis and how things are made and what you put in your body. And it that in and of itself is just part of a full innovation process in my mind, because it's all kind of connected to how can we do better for the customer by giving the best food or drinks possible. And part of that is that unveiling of the process of deeply innovating through supply all the way through the buyer.
Well, so Zane, I'll ask, because you live in such an interesting category, because your category is simultaneously innovative and hipster.
Yeah, it kind
and
of is, yeah.
ancient.
It is.
Kombucha is not a new drink, right? It's thousands of years old.
very true.
So, I mean, how is it that you approach this really old product and make it feel young and fresh?
I think, there has been so many great presentations throughout the week, past few days, and things that keep pointing out to me are customers and what they want and their palates are not separate worlds, and so they come together. So when you take this really old idea of fermentation that's been around a long time, and you're able to reinvent that into a way that's providing a function and value to the human body, in particular the gut, you begin to solve these passive and very aggressive or direct problems that people are having. And what makes it fun is that it's something that you can pick up, try and drink and be like, oh, I like the way this tastes. Oh, it does this thing for my body. Cool. And it's a really easy process. And so I think that's what makes it hip and fun. And, there's a really great water brand. I think it's what's Living Dead or Great something.
Oh, there's a bunch
Liquid
of real
Death?
in your
Liquid Death?
Yeah, Liquid
there's
Death.
a bunch of in-your-face water brands.
And when I look at Liquid Death, and we did a cool case study on Liquid Death, and I was like, wow, people are really excited about this avatar called a brand that's now bringing hydration to a different level for people. And it really didn't do anything new. It just kind of made it more approachable. And that's a really beautiful lesson around fermentation. It's easy to get there if you can make it accessible.
I think that's exciting. So we got a whole case study on your process, so I'm not going to let you have to dive in. And your team was fabulous, let me just say. Let's talk about your process, though. I mean, because you have thousands, as you would say, 50,000 SKUs or something.
15,000.
There's no money or time or resources to innovate on 50,000 SKUs.
Yes.
So, what's important? What's the process look like?
So that's where the art and the science need to connect a little bit. When we talk about the science, it's obviously what are those categories where it really matters. And you can get there through many different ways. You have a gap versus rest of market. You have an opportunity relative to the performance of the category, because at the end of the day, you don't want to innovate as home brands in a silo as a retailer. We're there to win. And we're a house of brands at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And home brand needs to be a complementary of the set, to win the set, to win as a company. So we have different filters to identify where are those categories that matter at that moment in time. That's the science part. Then the art part is understanding the customer and the consumer. Because you could find an opportunity from a business perspective, but if there's not an opportunity from a consumer perspective, you cannot force yourself. So how do you get there? How do you identify those needs, those problems to solve? And then you find those two things, and then the next ingredient is, okay, what can I do about it? Do I have the capabilities? And that's where partnering with our manufacturing network is so important. And because at the end of the day, most of our products are contract manufacturing, and we need to find those capabilities to be able to deliver on those opportunities and deliver on those innovation spaces. And it's important just to acknowledge, as you're doing that exercise, that the role of innovation can be different. Like, it's not only one size fits all. In some instances, the role is just going to be profitabilize the set. So you don't need to get very fancy with your innovation in those regards. Right. In some other spaces where probably you're the leader of that space because of the situation of that category, then you have the responsibility to drive and continue to drive more traffic to that category. So understanding your role within that space is important.
But so are you sharing that with manufacturers? I mean, if I'm a manufacturer of whatever and sit down, will you say, hey, tell me where my category plays into your strategy?
Yes, we don't take them through the whole journey.
Well, not everything.
Exactly, but definitely at least sharing our expectations of what we're looking for from an innovation perspective. It's something we're starting to do better. I will not tell you that we have been consistent enough, and that definitely we have talking a little bit about not only innovation but also collaboration. We need to get better in that regards, and it's a two-way street. Now, I've been in Albertsons for 2 years, which has been very interesting 2 years. If we all remember.
You don't say.
No, but the reality is that innovation have taken a step back or a secondary space, and product availability has become the most important factor. So it's been a tricky 2 years as it relates to innovation, and not only because of the focus of the team, but also of the capacities and capabilities.
Right.
Every time you try to innovate for a supplier, it's a pain, especially when they already have sold all their capacity. So even finding suppliers in these past couple of years willing to sit down with you and talk about innovation has not been an easy process, even though it's critical not only for the today, but for the tomorrow of the health of the category.
I mean, I can tell you, even for this event, I had probably a dozen suppliers that said, I have nothing to sell. There's no point in me coming. And I looked at them and said, you realize you're selling for tomorrow, not today.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
They're
been
like, "No,
that's
can't
been
do
our
it."
story for 14 years. We never have capacity, and it's in fact our folks are here with our board meeting. We were just talking about that very same thing, and all of a sudden we're like, could we find another 12 million bottles somewhere? Like, how could we figure out how to do that? And I always think about our food channel and our food supply in this country. It's vastly insecure. And I think a lot of times it's because we operate in these weird silos where you had people not being able to meet orders during the pandemic, and you had huge institutional food providers that were throwing out warehouses full of potatoes. So there is this emerging opportunity for innovation to come in, like Beto was saying, where maybe there's a services and a supply innovation that can happen. Maybe there's a way where these sides begin to have this really emerging dialogue about where is the future of food going? Where do I show up in that conversation? And as a manufacturer, we talk about that all the time. And we're like, how is their stores shifting and changing? And where do we actually support doing that work on behalf of our mission for the customer at the end of the day?
It's exciting. So let's talk about the collaboration, because that's the most skeptical thing. If I talk on both sides of the aisle, that's the most skepticism, and it's, as I said earlier, either no, they're not innovating, or yes, we're innovating, but they won't listen. So how do we open the conversation such that we can all begin to get better? Heather?
When we start our projects now, there's probably more time put into thinking about who are the stakeholders, who is going to care, who do we need feedback from, because we've had too many times where we failed when we were excited about something, we went and did it, but we missed the planogram, or there was something else going on in the marketing department that took precedent. So we do spend a lot more time now thinking about who do we need in the organization. That's a process. That could take us a month or two to figure out who's everybody we need to talk to and set up kind of formal interviews with really thoughtful questions, because they're not going to know what we need to know. So if we don't think strategically about what do we need to pull out to make this successful down the road, we may meet with people, right? How many times do we meet with people and I say, I met with marketing, I checked that box, we're all set, but then I found out I didn't ask them the right questions, right? So that's, I think, half the magic for us is in the beginning, getting everything we can out of the gate so that we can build the right timelines, have the right consideration set so that it opens the doors a little bit more for us when we get beyond just the product to getting the product in the store, set up on the shelf with a marketing plan.
Right. So, Kara, obviously you're selling coffee, but you have new things, right? Sooner or later you'll find another pumpkin spice and you'll want to pitch it.
I don't know if you'll replace pumpkin spice, but yeah,
It might.
we'll see one day.
But it happened once, so lightning might strike again. Who knows? So, I mean, when you approach a retailer with something that you guys believe in, you got great pricing, great product, or something. How are you getting them to listen?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the challenge, obviously. In sales, that's the day in and day out job and hopes you get their attention. So really, we just have to move forward with being the experts in the category. Obviously, when you have 15,000 different SKUs in your store across the private brands portfolio, it's just impossible to be an expert on 15,000 different items. So really coming to the table and knowing your stuff and knowing the whole category across the board, I think it means something. Being able to teach your retailer partners something that they can bring to their team that's going to make their category better and make them more money is a win for everyone. So really just trying to get in the door, information forward, having good products that support it, and then just sharing, like I mentioned earlier, we do a lot with fun flavors, so things beyond just the boring French vanilla and hazelnut that everyone's had. So we work closely with one of our flavor partners that we've done like a maple bacon coffee and a honey lavender coffee. So things that are just quirky and fun that get their attention because they're kind of weird, and then it opens the conversation a little bit further to dive in with other opportunities. So
what I'm hearing, communication is key.
Communication is key.
So talk to me about communication. So, but how do we keep that line open? Because that's...
So I believe there's two ingredients to be able to build. At the end of the day, what you're trying to build is a partnership.
Yeah.
I think the first one is ongoing or constant communication. And ongoing or constant, that doesn't mean it needs to happen every day, every week. It needs to have some cadence, that's what it means. Because if you're trying to sell last minute or whenever you have your idea, if you haven't built that trust, then chances are you're gonna have a lot of challenges to sell it in. The second ingredient for me is, and it's not alignment in goals, because at the end of the day it's two separate companies, but at least common grounds in goals. Because what I have seen when the communication doesn't work is when the two entities are trying to accomplish different things. And if they're not aware that they're trying to accomplish different things, the communication will not work, because what she's trying to sell versus what I'm trying to buy is, they're looking for completely different aspects. So having alignment and understanding, yes, you guys are the owners, the experts as it relates to the category, and the retailer is the expert as it relates to the business. So just finding and understanding those common grounds is important to ensure that we're successful.
Yeah, and I hear to that. I think a lot of our success, I think, has been, we don't necessarily, you gotta go, right? You gotta go.
You're good.
Yeah. That we don't necessarily go into a client with the idea that we're selling. We really do approach it from, we have a buyer that has a really clear plan of what they're attempting to do. We come in as an ally to say, look, let us help you manage this part of your business for you, with you, so you don't have to think about your kombucha and functional beverage set. Like, we're in it every day, we see it, we're producing for the leaders in the space, so let us share things that have worked.
Trust.
Yeah, and through that time period, you kind of build it. During the pandemic, we created what were called reflection kits, and it's just something I love to share because it gave a really simple prompt around like what's alive in you. Obviously we're a living beverage, but what's alive in you from a perspective of, as a human, what's happening in your world right now? And we were just talking about this backstage, and it was where they got this kit and it had some new products in there and had a simple moment that said, hey, this month we're inviting you to reflect on this thing. And then we shared some data about what was happening. And it was just kind of an idea. I was like, let's just try it and see. And it's gone overwhelmingly well. And we've had buyers who've gone on to other places who are like, hey, can I get on the list to get that kit again? I really liked what you guys said in March. And it's just an opportunity to not only keep communication going, but it builds that trust that I'm not just here to rush you, as some of you may or may not have joined fraternities or sororities, but the monochrome was like, you recruit for 50 weeks out of the year and you're rushing to. And it's kind of that idea. Keep that relationship there so when you have it, you can leverage it.
Well, I think it's interesting because so many manufacturers, they'll ask, how do I avoid procurement? Or how do I stay away from that?
Yeah.
And
We try to do
the first question is, first of all, are you taught? Yeah, they don't like procurement anymore than they do. Yeah, because then it's just a number. Then you don't even really know if it was the best product. It's just a number, right?
Yeah.
But the question becomes not how do I avoid procurement, but how do I build the relationship? How do I have communication? how do I do these other things and bring more value? And I look at them and go, well, are you only answering procurement or are you bringing something else?
Right.
Because you can answer and then give them a lot more and nobody complains.
So what I have seen that has most success with us when we're talking with our vendor community and you have the most productive sessions is when the vendor is not only selling, because that's the problem that you get into, is that you have your pipeline, you identify this next great thing, and you go through your 5, 6, whatever number of retailers, and you're giving the same pitch to every single one of them. You're gonna get lucky, probably one or a couple, because okay, it's a cool thing that you have, let me take it. Now, when we're talking about effective communication and common grounds, it's if you understand the position of the category within that retailer, and you're bringing a solution to that retailer relative to your capabilities, that's when you're going to have a very effective communication.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not only about having the communication channel open, and it's not only about coming and selling.
Right.
Even if the idea is great, it's not about the idea being great or not. Is that the right idea for what I need for my category?
For sure.
It's the most common piece of advice I give is do you know what brands they have and do you know what the strategy is for those brands?
Exactly.
And if so, are you pitching to fulfill one of their strategies? Exactly. They're like, well, I'm just selling rice, whatever it is. And I'm like, no.
Which is a shared responsibility.
It is.
Because as a retailer, it's in our best interest for our vendor community to understand our strategies. Like, if we have them and we don't share with them, it's on us that they don't come with the right solutions. Mm-hmm. Now, it's also on the vendor community of asking for them.
Yeah.
And being inquisitive on that. So it's always it's a two-way street in that regards. But that's what I have seen that works best both on the innovation front, but more importantly on the collaboration on how do we make it happen.
Perfect. Yeah. So last question for you guys. Inspiration. 2 sentences. What inspires inspiration? Zane. And you're very verbose. So
okay, so 2 sentences. It's going to be hard.
You can use mine too.
I think for me what inspired inspiration is this idea that we have a common unity, that we are in this really dynamic community together, and it's our responsibility to nurture one another by effectively finding those points where we connect. That's really inspiring because each of you have one of those little module points, and I want to explore that, and that's super inspiring to me.
Cool.
I would say a freedom and safety to have bold thoughts and an environment to support that, and then finding that inspiration for us through being out in the market and talking to customers and seeing what's going on is very inspiring, and where we lean for what we're going to do next.
Beto?
No, you stop it, because look at you. You have been the fashion plate the last 2 days. And you
My
are
inspiration
inspired.
is fashion, and I sell
But you
coffee.
know what? That's not a bad inspiration. It's okay.
No,
did you see the Wake Fern work? That was
is
fashion. That wasn't.
Yeah.
That is true. I mean, I will say a lot of my inspiration does come through walking the aisles of stores. I know Maria had mentioned that in her presentation, that when it comes to coffee, you learn a lot through other categories that have absolutely nothing to do with coffee. So I think getting inspiration from packaging and flavors through that avenue, and really just creating a good quality brand that we can stand behind and be proud of is definitely something that inspires me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
More than 2 sentences.
I think there's a lot of ways of getting inspiration, and even throughout these 2 days, we have learned a lot of those spaces. One is international. Like yesterday, we were looking at a lot of examples international. That's a great place to find inspiration. The other one that you also shared is asking your employees of your company. They also can provide a bunch of inspiration. But one space that I have also seen very effective in terms of driving, especially transformative innovation, is collisions. And it's the combination of 2 items or solutions to create even a bigger or broader solution. And you can get probably the top 10 innovations of the last decade, and most of them you're going to find that a lot of them is not that they invented something completely new, is that they just find ways of combining or products or services or something to create something that's even better.
That's an iPhone, right? It's an iPhone.
Among others, but yes.
Among others. We'll take a couple of minutes if anybody has questions. Frederick's going to volunteer.
Very interesting panel, as you said, very diverse panel. However, both Beto and Heather belong to really large organizations. So we know that innovation is, it comes from a lot of startups. So how do you handle this barrier of entry, right? I'm a startup, for example, you would fall in love with the product, but I could never send one case to each of your stores because you're just too big. So do you just wait until that product, get some tractions in smaller chains and then you pick it up, or you say, hey, we're going to help you, or we have a program specifically for really cool ideas but need time and capital?
You want to jump first? Or?
Sure. I'm going to try and answer it quickly. There's a lot of incubator programs within CVS for various types of things. So some are to help small suppliers, some are to try trends in small ways before we go to 9,000 doors, which creates a big liability for both us and manufacturers. So we have lots of kind of incubator launchpad programs to address that kind of stuff.
Yeah, in our case, own brands for Albertsons is much more a scaled or scalable business. So we should usually, when we enter into a product, it's because the product has proven success or the space is sizable enough. Now, with that said, for startups or smaller companies, as Albertsons, we can launch things that are specific for a division, especially if they're relevant or have a high relevance for a specific zone of the country. So we have a lot of examples of startup brands within our company where we're leaning on smaller brands and smaller products, and we're able to do that by focusing in a specific division.
And I'll tell you, if I were pitching, I'd pitch some seasonal products right now. Every grocer in America wants a seasonal one. It's going to do something.
Yeah,
great.
I would agree. And I mean, I think there's a lot to say around, when we started 14 years ago and we kind of grown and grown, the idea that you have to be a Fortune 100 company with vast amounts of capacity to produce for market leaders like Albertsons or CVS or 7-Eleven is not true. And you find your lane, you get really clear about it. We lead in our space and our volume built based upon the relationships that we built with the retailer. Because everyone wants to be able to have that next story. And if you find that it's too big and there is a barrier, I always say go inward and figure out what the dial tone isn't missing, and then figure out a way to reapproach. Yep. Because people will support success and they'll support ideas, and for the most part, humans are in it to kind of do it together.
Right.
Awesome. Anybody else? No. Very good.
And we have a ton of probiotic soda that you guys can pick up when you leave. So I don't have to pack it home.
They have a lot of samples, so please take some.
Take
otherwise,
cans.
Zane has to tote it back to Asheville, and he'll feel guilty about that carbon footprint for a week.
I'll feel horrible. You know I will this. I'm calling you later. Counseling.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.